Hello, my name is Mary White. I'm one of the co-chairs of WEED, Women Eco-Artist Dialogue. And we are very pleased tonight to have the artist presentation, first of three artist presentations for our membership 2024 exhibition, Lands and Symbiotic Futures. I'll start with the land acknowledgement, and then we'll quickly go into meeting the artists and looking at them. If you would like, please put your own land acknowledgement in the chat, just to see so everybody can see where other people are from.
And the meeting sign is not in front of the screen share, is it?
All right. So just a moment to talk about WEED. WEED was started in 1996. It's a volunteer-run collective. We're all women, female identified visual artists, writers, curators, art historians, researchers, scientists, and others interested in highlighting the intersection of art and ecological issues. And we're just delighted to have you all here. We'll start with a land acknowledgement and then introduce the artists. WEED's office stands on the territory of the Wichen, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chichonio-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County, near one of the largest towns in the Bay Area. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familiar descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize the tribe, Ohlone tribe, who have campaigned to become federally recognized, the Association of Mermaytush Ohlone, for researching, revitalizing, and Mermaytush Ohlone history and culture, and the Confederated Villages of Lejeune and the Sagorete Lands Trust, who are working to return native land back to Indigenous stewardship. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We're recording this presentation. Please keep your audio muted during the presentation. The hosts may mute you if there's extra noise. And if you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat for the questions section afterwards. After the presentation, we will possibly start a second recording for the questions and answers. We may keep the same one. All right, so we'd like to introduce Christina Bertia from the Exhibitions Committee, who's organized this first presentation.
Well, Mary, would you please read the call for Lands and Symbiotic Futures?
Yes, the call, or just let me get these two people in. We put out a call, which we debated on for a very long time, and this is what we came up with. Human relationships with lands and soils are deep and complex, sometimes based on listening and reciprocity, sometimes scarred by exploitation and toxicity. From colonization, war, and industrial agriculture to reciprocity, stewardship, and respect. From minute microbial life to vast landscapes, lands and soils reflect choices to live in unity with or in subjugation of the natural world. WEED invites stories of land, soils, and visions for the future, both ecological and cultural. All right, off we go. Christina, take it away.
Okay, Katherine.
Okay, hi. My name is Katherine Binns. Thank you for having me here. I'm a mixed media artist, and I work in mostly painting and collage, and sometimes I do puppetry as well. But no matter what I do, my tends to be landscape-based, where landscape is a metaphor for human emotion. Now, this one's a little bit different because it's a bit more literal. This piece is called In These Hands, and it's one piece from a larger body of work that I'm doing called The Smell of Cedar, The Taste of Sunlight. The overall concept of the body of work is about motherhood in the time of climate change. And the series of art tells the story of a woman on her journey through pregnancy and new motherhood, while she also grapples with postpartum depression and climate anxiety. The story follows her young family on a healing journey as they build a deep connection to a specific urban forest in their city. As you can see, this artwork depicts two young children completely absorbed in observing something on a tree stump. This work depicts an activity I think many of us here are familiar with, and that is forest bathing or nature bathing. And studies, of course, have shown something that I think many of us intuitively know, and that's natural spaces, the land, is a healing space. Being on the land and being in nature, of course, improves mood, and it lowers stress, it lowers anxiety, and especially when we purposefully slow down to appreciate nature and leave our busy world behind. On a very personal note, this is my story. These are my children, and I truly do believe that slowing down and being in the forest was a vital component in my healing. And further, I saw how much my children thrived when we were in the forest. And the ability to be in nature can instill in them a sense of respect and connection to the land. And it builds knowledge that we humans are not separate from the land, but in fact are part of a bigger ecosystem. And not only what we do affects nature, but nature conversely also affects us as well.
Great, thank you very much. Oh. Okay, Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Boissevain, and I'm a lens-based, photographer and visual artist. This is from a series called The Trees Will Outlive Us. And this series was started back in, I believe, 2015. I went back to a farm that had been in my family for 4 generations on the South Fork of Long Island. And one of my cousins took me out to the farm, and he said, it's, basically being taken back to the forest. And it was, really interesting. It catalyzed this whole series where I photograph human sites that are abandoned and being reclaimed by nature. So this particular shot is a couple years into the series. This is actually in Germany at a place called Voltlingen Hütte, which is a giant coal factory, decommissioned coal factory that the German people have decided to let the forest take back, this incredible industrial site. And it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it takes about, probably 3 or 4 days to see the entire factory, because it's so huge. And one of the things that struck me about it was, that the Nazis had used the metal they did this kind of extraction from the coal, where they took out metal and they used it in their weapons. And just the history of this place and the fact that it was being consumed by nature, it was really an incredible experience. And I spent about 3 or 4 days there photographing continuously. And I really enjoyed, just the experience of imagining what the planet will look like when there are less humans. So I actually call this the post-apocalyptic sublime, which is referencing, how nature has this ability to heal and take back what we've
Thank you
relinquished.
very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. Next is Pamela Casper. Pamela?
I needed to unmute. My name is Pamela Casper. I'm from Brooklyn, acknowledged land of the Lenape. I have been painting, and I am primarily a painter, although I do sculpture, but I've been painting what's going on below the roots of trees for about 12 years, long before a lot of people really understood what I was painting. And now it seems to be more in the general public's awareness, which is a good thing. But this particular painting, I've chosen to slice through the ground, so to speak, so that you can see from top to bottom what goes on and the integration of all the elements, both microscopic and roots, and also a lot of unseen energies that I imagine. And I will also say that all of my landscapes, which are about the unseen, are an integration of memory, intuition, invention, and observation. And because I'm painting so much of what cannot be seen, it's kind of liberated me to allow my imagination to take off. And I do that, especially when it comes to color. This painting is counterintuitive because as you go down, the colors become more vibrant and even lighter. And the other element in this painting, which by the way is called Forest Orchestra, is this incredible integration of all the things that are going on and life that is unfolding simultaneously. And I paint always to the edges because life is folding and unfolding, and there's kind of no end to it. And I see the connection to the title in the way that all the elements are taking place, or all the life processes are taking place simultaneously, yet everything is synchronized, just like the instruments in an orchestra. And I guess the main takeaway from revealing all this that's going on and how well it just kind of interfaces is this kind of mutual care between the roots and organisms. And if humanity would embrace this system of compassion and interconnectivity, I think the world would be in a much better place. So it is kind of a model for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Vicki Gunter.
Hello, everybody. I'm Vicki Gunter, and I want to thank the jurors who chose all the amazing work for this exhibit, and everyone from Weed who did the hard work of putting this important online exhibit together. As my best friend Beth said, it's impressive. I was a dancer most of my life. My focus shifted to ceramic sculpture in 2014. My art, whether dance or sculpture, has always addressed environmental and social justice issues. I enjoy luring you, the viewer, in with beauty to enchant us into guardianship. I value clay's infinite potential, mirroring our own. My first image for one nest in my head was as a starving canary fledgling and human infant nested together, formed upon hearing of the Yemen famine in 2017 and the 2018 UN warning that 13 million people there face starvation in the worst famine in the world in 100 years. The final sculpture, which I created during lockdown, expanded to a larger worldview to imply all species and the examination of how we sustain ourselves. One nest is from my Canary and Elephant series. Every piece in the series incorporates a yellow cautionary canary and helps expose the fossil-fueled profiting elephants in the room. All life is precious and fragile. Babies are hungry for a healed world. A careful look at the sculpture reveals our earth nest is flooding as glaciers melt and the parched earth cracks. Yellow plastic twisty ties represent the plastic trash that is now found in bird nests and our own wombs. Our babies are joining the cautionary canary in the coal mine. Yes, this piece is shaped like a stop sign. These babies also represent a cry for hope and action. One half of the piece does represent sprouting new growth. I love birds. Their visits thrill me in my garden of native plants that attract the insects that thrill them. They won't all make it. They have to survive feral cats, pesticides in neighbors' yards, droughts, floods, and loss of habitat for the next nest. Let us honor our one nest and grow native plants that attract the most critical bird baby food, yummy, soft caterpillars. The entire food web depends on insects for all who eat.
Okay, 33 minutes.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
that's it. Thank you.
Elizabeth Kennedy.
Hello. You can't see me, but the work will suffice, I think. My name is Elizabeth Kenneday, and I am mostly a photo-based artist. An early influence on my work was the new topographics movement of the mid-1970s, particularly the new West works by Robert Adams that featured new housing developments and other more mundane subjects in Denver and the Southwest. At the time, these landscapes were shocking to audiences and to the reverential aesthetics and content of the landscape photographers like Ansel Adams that they were used to. That came as a surprise. The new topographics prompted me to examine my own environment growing up in Southern California and now living in Reno, Nevada, both of which have been and are subject to rampant growth and development. Moving past aesthetic issues, I began to explore the effects of this growth on the land. The imagery here is from Peavine Mountain, north of the Truckee River. The mountain has a steep gradient and the soil is loamy, sandy, essentially high desert. Development on this mountain began in the early 1980s, and immediately there were water problems. The Chalk Creek drainage, which empties into the Truckee River, consisted of an ephemeral creek, only appearing after rainfalls and snows. It began to run year-round, carrying construction runoff, followed by runoff water from suburban activities such as watering fertilized lawns and washing cars. The pollutants were carried into the, were carried into the Truckee River, which provides 80% of Reno's drinking water. To resolve this problem, what were called bioreactors were put in place, large ponds that were especially planted to cleanse the creek waters. It's quite amusing but gratifying to see these lush oases amid the dry hills of Peavine Mountain. I've documented other mitigation practices such as this in this work, and it's clear that more need to be developed and implemented as the folly of building on the steep gradient of Peavine Mountain with its loamy, sandy soil is not going to stop anytime soon. Thank you. And I want to thank the previous presenters for their presentations.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, Petra.
Hello, hi there. Thank you so much for having me here. Okay, so I am sharing with you a Crypt Tree poem, which is a video. So you'll just see here the opening image of the video. Crypt Tree poem is a a crip drift. So I am running crip drifts with fellow disabled people. So crip is one of the words that is used within the community to refer to the community. So it's working with other disabled people, and we are running these crip drift methods for moving through the world as artists living in pain, touching, being with, sensing in a world that is likewise disabled, compromised, and thriving in complexity. And these crip drifts happen at lots of different trees all over the world. This one was in Cassis, France, and you see the beautiful texture of the tree. This is an Aleppo pine, and this Aleppo pine grows right by the side of the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. And you can't see it in this image, but if you were to watch this whole 3-minute long video, you see that this tree is incredibly gnarled and kind of reaches across the area where humans walk. So it kind of, you can shelter under it, and it just moves across like a wave from the sea toward the cliff of Cassis. And so the video is a video journey. I'm there with just with my little iPhone, and I am both recording my own movement with the tree, and also I'm recording how other disabled people move around the tree. So if you watch the video, you see a wheelchair user, you see another cane user moving around the tree. And these are the kinds of performances that I lead in many different sites. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Judit?
Well, hello everyone. My name is Judit Navratil, and it is an honor to be here with all this amazing group of artists, or like a group of amazing artists today, and to do it together on these amazing lands. I am an interdisciplinary artist, and most of my work is virtual. So this platform is also an interesting space to think about land together, being online though. And as an immigrant in various countries and cultures, I usually work around connection, and that's the center of my art practice. One other part of my art practice, besides working with drawings, paintings, and virtual reality, is embodied practices. And in this instance, it is the long-distance somersault practice that I started to record in 2015. But I have been always tumbling on the ground before too. And long-distance somersaulting became my compass meditation, with the aim to roll as far as I can and try to gaze in the eye of the hurricane and think about how to be present in the middle of the whirlwind of life. And things that I learned on the way is how to connect with land, place, and space, how to take up space as an immigrant or like a newcomer, and how to connect these places by the notion of long-distance somersaulting, how carry the dust and dirt as we also carry our knowledge and culture from place to place, and being a bridge and a connector. And so I practice this to accept whatever is on my path, let it be goose poop or rose thorns or scratchy salt. And this image is from the apocalypse or apocalyptic times of 2020 in the Black Rock Desert, when we could barely see the sun and could smell the smoke of the forest fires everywhere. And so these embodied cycles, thinking about cycles as well, is bringing the energy of rolling. In Hungarian, and I think also in German, the word for rolling is called bukfenc, and it literally could translate into falling or failing and roll further. So I'm also interested in the notion of falling and continue moving towards somewhere new. And so I guess this can be a great practice towards an emergent and hopeful future, hopefully, if we learn how to listen deeply to our paths and learning from the soil and Mother Earth. And
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Next is Janet Powers.
Hi, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. And for me, much of my life, I've always been able to connect with the phrase, to all we are connected. And I truly believed it, but at the same time, I was rarely feeling it deeply. And about 10 years ago, I was introduced to a woman named Crystal Woodward, who shared a practice of taking walks in wild places with our minds and our senses wide open, sort of like the forest bathing. And inevitably, we would experience what she called drops of eternity. And we would collect those moments and take them back with us in journals or just in our memories and in our bodies. And then we would create art. And meanwhile, at the same time, I was also spending a lot of time reading books about soils. And the previous artist with the trees and the soils is very much what I got enmeshed with, and understanding, and just understanding the unfathomable masses of microbes that lived within the soil, and that and really was this whole symbiotic relationship. And I could really begin to feel the pulse of life in a deeper way, and how all life is governed by these invisible symbiotic relationships. So eventually, through a lot of art play and some study, I began to mix and mingle the science with what I was reading and the awe that I was feeling in moments of eternity. And before I knew it, I was obsessively creating paintings that brought these two worlds together. I got inspired by a technique I learned, I think, in kindergarten or first grade, where you draw colored crayons on a hard piece of paper, and then you put black crayon over it, and then you scrape it away. And so somehow this evolved to a process where I use a water-soluble wax pastel on a base, and then I completely cover it with a drawing or a painting out of oil pastels. And having nothing to do oftentimes with what was below, I just would start all over and create. And then the fun really began as I started to scrape bits and pieces away to reveal the life that was beneath, and to find those moments where I felt like I was a part of Gaia. It was a way for me to connect. I feel our world is governed by life and elements and processes and energies we cannot see, and that we are all as one. And this art is my way of remembering that and being with this vastness and intermingling. In this particular piece, I felt really illustrated, not in a realistic sort of way, but in sort of a fanciful way. Thank you.
Lisa?
I was trying to hit that unmute button. Hello, everybody. No, it's been really wonderful to see all the creative work that people are doing on this topic, and I'm happy to be amongst you all. So my work kind of brings together different areas of focus, which I've been an architect most of my life. I have an environmental science degree, and I'm also an artist. So my work has focused on bringing those areas together, kind of the conflict or the way interaction between built environment and buildings and natural environment, particularly on sea rise issues. So between maybe 10, 15 years ago, I've been focusing on sea level rise. And it occurred to me, after looking at a lot of other people's work, that the message gets across better with more positive intention, because we've focused a lot on climate change. All the artists here deal with climate change, and so much of the messaging is just very negative and about the destructions of our environment. And that's kind of the work that I had been doing also, about how sea level rise really impacts the environment in a negative way, and it impacts both the natural and the built environment. So lately I've been kind of taking a new tack of seeing how nature can work with our built environment and how it can work to heal it or protect it. I've started this new series, and Rooting Down is the first one. And what this shows is a mangrove. You're kind of looking at both above and below the water. And the mangrove has a very important purpose, which is that it roots down into through the water into the earth below, and it stabilizes the earth and protects buildings and other parts of the environment from the impact of sea rise. So it holds the sea rise at bay, protects the cities and people from waves and storms. So this piece shows exactly that. There's a built city in the background, kind of receding, and has trees around it. And in the foreground, there is a mangrove of.
Thank you, Lisa.
And of course, we can all talk more, but we will go on to the next person and see
Great,
what
thank you very
wonderful
much.
work they have.
Joanne?
Okay, so I'm Joanne Ross, and I live in Nutley, New Jersey. And I do gratefully acknowledge the native Lenape peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather. And I would like to thank everybody who's here tonight. It's been really interesting to me to see everybody's work. And I especially want to thank all those at Weed who made lands and symbiotic futures possible. So this photograph, so the photographic work that was chosen for this show is from an ongoing series called Turbulent Margins. This image was taken along the Gihon River in Johnson, Vermont on March 3rd of this year at 11:13 a.m. After a flood. My process involves intuitive exploration and research. The point of departure for Turbulent Margins evolved from my documentation of the Upper Delaware River along the river banks, also called riparian zones. This led me to a residency at the Vermont Studio Center, where I continue to photograph in these land areas, realizing that these transitional margins of land can be a weak point or a strong point for a waterway, depending on how well they have been cared for, and as a result, play a pivotal role in our environment. Johnson, Vermont, when I arrived there, was in the process of rebuilding from a severe flooding. I would go out daily to photograph. The more I documented the area and looked down at the soil, the more I began to feel the river and land reaching out to me as collaborators in the aftermath, story, and memory of the events as seen in the configuration of debris, decomposition, displacement, and plant renewal. These tableaux became the basis of my current work. The title denotes specific time and date of a tableau to show the passage of time. I have also chosen to document the land using an intimate aerial view with no discernible horizon line. Each piece details itself with light, color, and shadows to evoke poetic encounters. I am currently documenting other rivers that include the Delaware, Passaic, Hackensack, Hudson, and my local and very much precious to my heart, the third river, also known as the Yanacor River in Nutley, New Jersey. Finally, my intention with the Turbulent Margins is to generate conversation, consideration, and reflection on the pressing issues of climate change while maintaining hope through the lens of photography.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Eliza?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. This painting began with a rabbit in a state of alarm. A rabbit is a creature connected to the land it exists on. This rabbit is in peril as its home, an olive grove, is destroyed. To me, a rabbit is similar to a child in that they are alive in a state of innocence. They rely on the world working according to the plans of nature. They are governed by the laws of nature, not governments, not religions, not commerce. This is Gaza, small, densely populated. As we now know, it's a land scorched so extremely by war that even the soil itself will take years of recovery to be life-sustaining. How long human recovery takes is yet to be seen, as there is no end in sight at this moment. It's the deafening sound of silencing. What is happening in Gaza is genocide. I am a fierce believer in the benefits of peace. And I'm of the opinion that wars are tools perpetuating systems of domination rather than what I hear from world leaders, which is a cry for battle in the name of fairness and democracy. This genocide is being brought to us live in our names in real time. There is a cargo ship on the horizon in this work. It sits just off the coast. This is an important reference for why we are witnessing violent assaults on this strip of land and all of its inhabitants. This is the impending control of commerce in the Middle East. Geographically, it's ideal for building a large canal, similar to the Suez Canal. It's also ideal for building beachfront resorts and high-end hotels for a new Riviera. An estimated $80 billion yearly of revenue is expected to come from such developments, benefiting investors, many of whom are American citizens. We rarely hear the plans for post-genocide. It is significant to fully understanding things. In this work, doves are the other inhabitants of this ancient olive tree. As the groves fall under attack, the healthy, stable part of the tree is in its roots, in its center, where doves are living, just living. As peace is destroyed and life is annihilated, we are left in darkness and destruction. To kill doves is to kill children. It is the spontaneous combustion of hope, the antithesis of democracy, a forcing of hypocrisy and an altering of the spirit of belief that says all humans belong equally on this planet. The birthright is to earth. It is prejudicial to elevate any country, land, or identity to having more right to be alive and human than another. I see our most significant contribution to the health of the land, the possibility of a future, is to make peace, understanding the interdependence.
Thank you, Eliza. Thank you, Eliza. That was great.
Hey,
Alyssa?
Christina, sorry for interrupting. I think you have to mute yourself when people speak because there's an echo coming from your computer. Yeah, when people speak, please mute yourself. Thank you.
I'm not able to do that.
Okay.
All right, I'll get started. Thank you, everyone. Everything that's been shared has been beautiful and inspiring. I'm really happy to be here. My name's Alyssa Wigant. I'm a graphic designer and lettering artist based in San Jose, California, land of the Muwekma Ohlone peoples. And much of my work frames hand-lettered words as a focal point and surrounded by illustrations like these. And this piece was actually a design commission for a shirt design for a local nonprofit here in San Jose called Vegilution. So they empower volunteers to work with the land to harvest produce, learn how to farm, deliver farm boxes to low-income neighborhoods. And food as a human right is one of their core values. So, and it's something I resonate with, and I've volunteered with them. So it was really cool to design this piece, and it almost is a living piece in its own right because it helps empower this organization. And so I started with food as a human right as the focal point, but it's surrounded by garden-gloved fists of power, holding shovels, harvests, all alongside different produce and plants. And each of these has historical significance in terms of forced starvation, food strikes, and farm worker strikes. So, for example, the grapes refer to the Delano grape strikes of the 60s and 70s, the berries in reference to berry strikes, and the lettuce in reference to the salad bowl strikes, the Irish potato famine as well. So it's imperative to understand these histories when thinking about where our food comes from and the land that they grow on. And like I said, it's kind of a living piece, it being on t-shirts for this organization that people can purchase. And ultimately, the awareness I want folks to take away with this is that, as with any human right, it's political and can be taken for granted. So think about how food in our land can be political, like we're seeing forced starvation in Palestine at the moment as a weapon. And think about the farm workers and laborers who bring our food to the table, how they're often ignored, but do such significant work in such grueling conditions in order for us to survive, right? Think about the rich history of our land and how we can work with it to grow sustenance with organizations such as Vegolution. Urban farms are very popular right now. And then also to think about how we can share what we reap with our communities because we sustain each other. So thank you.
We don't hear you, Christina. You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Yoncha. I am fortunate to teach art to college students in Denver, but I am from Delaware originally. I make work in collaboration with plants, microbes, soil, and try to think of them as collaborators with agency. So what you're seeing is a still from a visual score made with sphagnum moss as part of a Fulbright fellowship in Finland. So I went to work at a science organization that is studying post-extraction landscapes from harvesting peatland for fuel. And this is the plant that generates peatland. I was really fascinated because it engineers this ecosystem where mostly only it can really survive and thrive well, which reminds me of us. I took soil core samples and processed them with a hyperspectral camera, which I'm happy to explain more, and transposed that data onto a musical score. And then my collaborator, Hannah Seelan, translated that into traditional music notation. It was performed about a year ago by the Tuira Chamber Choir, so a 50-person ensemble in Finland. And so over about 10 minutes, we can hear, we think, 160 years of soil development. And then the image you see is taking a microscopic image and reshuffling the pixels using the hidden seed image from the data processing system that I used. That was made in collaboration with programmer Brian Givens using processing visual coding software. So I'm really interested in this idea of this novel ecosystem that we have changed so much that, this is a biofuel, but it can't feasibly regrow there. So we're left with something completely new and post-human. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I'm not being able to advance here.
Maybe escape and then try.
That's not working. Oh, here we go. Okay. So I'm Christina Bertia, and I'm turning on my clock too. This piece is called Double Vision, Bringing Groundwater Recharge into Focus. Because everywhere, aquifers are being overdrafted for irrigation water. And the nearsighted solution is to limit pumping, take land out of production, and leave it bare. But that doesn't alleviate the problem because bare soils off-gas carbon into the air, adding to the excess carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere. And then sunlight hitting bare soil re-radiates heat into the local climate, making temperatures higher. So leaving soil bare actually worsens the local climate situation, instead increasing the need for irrigation water. So this mock ad proposes a more far-sighted vision for what can be done with lands that have been retired from crop production. We can partner with microbes to restore living soil that receives water, recharges aquifers, and sequesters carbon. Because remember, plants and microbes are nature's brilliant carbon capture technology. So planting hyperdiverse cover crops, that means many species from at least 4 different plant families can support equally diverse soil microbes who sequester carbon and aggregate soil particles into what's called a soil carbon sponge. Just like any sponge, that soil carbon sponge can then soak up water and let it trickle down deep, recharging the groundwater. So research has also shown that this plant and microbial diversity actually enhances resilience to drought and flood. So it's possible that very little water, if any, would be required to maintain such a cover crop. But to keep the microbes alive doing that work of sequestering carbon and aggregating the soil, you have to have live plants all the time growing year-round, because what they're doing is creating exudates and trading them through their roots with the microbes, and then the microbes bring them nutrients. And the other thing that's happening is that those plants are transpiring, which means they're perspiring just the way we do. They're releasing moisture into the air. And what happens during that process is that the liquid water in the body of the plant actually changes phase into a vapor as it's released. And that process ties up heat energy in the vapor, and then that's taken high into the atmosphere. So this transpiration that's going on when you have plants on the ground actually cools the local climate. And it's what nature has created. It's nature's air conditioning that actually makes life possible for beings like us on the surface of the earth. Otherwise, if there were no plants, it would just be that sunlight bouncing off the bare soil and making a really hot climate all around. So these super diverse cover crops could possibly use very little water and could possibly actually alleviate the aquifer depletion issue. So thank you. Okay. Now we move to the fun part where we talk to each other. So I'm sure some of you wanted to hear more from each of us. So.
I actually didn't go.
Pardon?
I haven't gone yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, Perry. Oh, goodness.
Okay.
All right. Let me. I don't know how we. There. Okay.
No problem. I was like, this couldn't be alphabetical. Anyway, I kept wondering what was going on. Anyway, thank you to everybody, to the whole weed group and the jurors, also all the artists who came out to speak tonight. So I'm just going to tell you a little story behind this painting, Green Spaces for Indy, Bay Area, California, 2024. It's acrylic on canvas. Oh, now we're on someone else's work.
I know. Sorry.
It's okay.
I was trying to mute myself.
So the story starts with my move from New York to the Bay Area 5 years ago due to my mother-in-law's Alzheimer's diagnosis, because she had no other family on the West Coast, and my husband was going through mergers, so he was seeking new opportunities. So we moved out here, and upon arrival, I felt disoriented and was drawn to mapping my surroundings physically and emotionally to feel grounded in this new environment. I noticed the abundance of green spaces and parks in California, which differed from the East Coast where I grew up. I felt tension between the availability of open spaces and the restrictions, especially during the pandemic. So many parks were closed to the public due to COVID restrictions in the Bay Area. And even after reopening, there were limitations on access, especially for us because we had a dog. So this tension kind of shaped my work as I tried to find my bearings and navigate what was accessible. So the painting Green Spaces for Indy Bay Area is part of a larger series that explores parks and counties and public spaces where I walk my dog and find grounding in the new environment, and also where I recharge. My art reflects my journey, including the challenge of caring for my mother-in-law and finding my bearings as an adult in a really different environment. As I ventured beyond my neighborhood, I was surprised by the diverse geography of the Bay Area. I learned that the Bay Area is geographically connected but divided by counties and cities, 101 cities to be exact. So each county has its own rules and regulations. And my work started to reflect this as I used pastel colors to define the areas that I visited and distinguish the spaces I passed through. The gray lines on the piece that divide the spaces represent the major roads that one might drive down, and the red line is specifically the route that we take from Silicon Valley up to my mother-in-law's house in Marin. And the green spaces represent all the places where we could walk the dog. So the work is more than just mapping a physical journey. It's also about processing feelings of displacement and seeking connection and reflection on my relationship with the land. Mapping helped me feel more connected to my new home, despite my initial feelings of being uprooted. So the limitations on the access to the land made me more aware of how we interact with the land, sometimes with respect and sometimes with restriction. So I hope that this piece invites other people to reflect on their own connections to their spaces, and also as they move through, I ask you all to consider what it means to truly belong to a place. So that's all. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Did everyone have a chance to speak?
If there is nothing, do you want to stop sharing so you can see people?
Yes. I wanted to advance to the announcement about the next presentations that are coming up. So just so the remaining artists in the show will have an opportunity to speak on 2 other dates. So
All right, well, let's have a little conversation. Are there some questions that you have for each other, or general questions? You can raise your hand or you can put your question in the chat.
I asked my question of Judit, how far does she actually somersault? And she actually answered it in the chat, but how did you start doing this somersaulting?
Well, I appreciate your question, Vicki. Thank you. I started somersaulting by just, like, to be honest, when I was young and got drunk, I would always somersault home. And there was a point when I was like, I should do this professionally and I should take it serious. And then I was waiting for 10 years to get the proper outfit that I imagined to be a glitch of some sort. I still don't have that outfit, so but at least I started making protectors for myself, and I also actually host like group rolling settings with others so that they can also make their protectors from used stinky yoga mats, and then we can try to roll together in a given soft space, which brings a very interesting awareness of each other's bodies. And of course, folks don't have to somersault, but just kind of do some cyclical movement, whatever feels right to them. That's how it began.
Thank you.
I was very interested, and once again really appreciate to be here with you all. And I was interested to see the connecting threads of belonging and home and learning from nature and land. I don't have a specific question to anyone, but I would love to hear a bit more how you are in the process of connecting with where you are and with your communities of your human communities and non-human communities.
Let's see, Petra raised her hand.
Yeah, but that was for a question, so that's
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Not for the answering here.
Anybody like to take on that question?
But I can speak to that
I
actually. It's
can.
quite happy to. So this is Petra. So I am a community artist. So I do these crypt drifts are usually happening with numbers of people. So I love the I love both working alone from time to time and then having working with human and more than human community. Only that tree, the bark of which you just saw that just a tiny little bit of bark, but the whole point of this project was to just visit with that tree on a more or less daily basis. You know, it just was just so lovely when you have all these tourists running around, you're on the edge of the beach and you can just be with the very different time signature of a tree, which is really hard for me to do as well, because of course, like all of us, right, hectic lives, what have you, but when you do this as a practice for a while, even if it's just for a few weeks or months, just hang with a particular tree, there's some kind of really beautiful intimacy. And then other people see me doing that. And then I had various events at the tree as well. So that just makes me very happy. But then I am a performance artist. So there we go. We're working with people.
Did you want to ask your question, Petra, before we go on?
Sure. If no one else wants to answer that one, then I'll go to this one. I was just fascinated by how many of you work with the micro level. You know, so many people here go into the soil and do this really exciting work with unpacking what it might look like down there, right? And it's so interesting to me that down there in the soil there's this complete absence of light, or a relative absence of light, let's put it this way. And then we're bringing the light into it, we're bringing color into it. And I'm just really interested to have maybe one or two of the people who create images of microorganisms. I'd love you to speak about the connection between our fantasies of what these creatures are like and how you work with scientific documentation, for instance, you know. So there's a lot of scientific material that one can use and reuse, but then there are these fascinating fantasies that I find so interesting. So maybe one or two of you want to answer that one.
Who wants to take that one on?
Can I comment until someone takes that on?
Sure. Go ahead, Deb.
Hi, Mary. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Petra, a quick response. I'm not one of the presenting artists, but I am a great appreciator of all you artists. And I just want to make an observation. Something that you just said, which is talking about the importance of building one's relationship with the tree. I have my own, and I've been surprised when I've mentioned it to people, how many other people have echoed this sentiment, how important it is to them. Judit, I see you raising your hands. Thank you. And also I see connected in your observation this idea of the micro. And I think that connects with pacing, you know, the speed of a tree being so slow, the amplification down to the micro. We're talking about slowing down and paying more attention in both these things. So just adding an observation.
I'd like to reflect on something that on your comment or question, Petra, which is the idea of bringing light to the underground, which is certainly, once you go down a little ways, is dark. And I'm just thinking about that in the way that I think as a culture, we're so drawn to light, and we want light all over. And it kind of reminds me of a comment that I heard and just took immediately to heart about, well, what if the desert really doesn't want to be made to bloom? You know, what, you know, what it's so hard to imagine how to engage with the dark in a way that respects darkness. and that holds that half of that duality, the yin yang duality of the darkness, without shining a light on it and making it into something that it's not. And I say that more in response to your question than, I mean, I loved that image. I can remember of the tree and the roots and the light underneath and the fungi and all of that stuff. It was so beautiful. And yet there is that question of, is it possible for us as beings who are visual for the most part? I mean, obviously there's many among us who are not visual, but we're here dealing as visual artists. How do we engage dark without destroying it? That's my question.
Could I respond to that just very briefly? I think that question has been asked of some of Rothko's work at the Rothko Chapel, who did, if you're not familiar, I'm sure some of you are, these enormous paintings of gray, the paint all gray. And when you go in there, that darkness starts to take on color. So I think the question Lorraine asked is wonderful. So I would highly suggest, if you're interested in the subject as well, just take a look at those paintings. Thank you.
Okay. Wendy?
Hi, thank you. This has been very inspiring. I'm not an artist myself, but I appreciate art, and I found this wonderful. And the question that Petra asked, I think is really interesting. And, you know, when I think about the microorganisms in the soil, there's billions of them. We know so little about them. It's a very humbling thing. If we really take it in, it's humbling. And I think, I mean, I don't know, is that the purpose of art, to like kind of put us in our place in a way? Like things are so much bigger than us in a way. So there's like this, I don't know, for me, there's like this spiritual aspect to it because it's humbling. And one thing that I'm sort of seeing the world different because I read this book about animal perception, and animals perceive so much differently than we do. And so those, like, we can't even imagine the life of those microorganisms. So not only it's like imagining the invisible, like what Janet Powers, the title of her work was Imagining the Invisible. We can't even imagine like what the perception of that is. Like we're so, as human beings, we just have a limit. And I mean, I think in some ways art tries to take us beyond our limits, but also to make us understand that we are limited, you know, like we don't have all the answers. I don't know if that made any sense, but thanks.
Thank you. Responding to Wendy. I think it's true. We don't have all the answers, but I think that if we pay, the more attention we pay to nature, we will find the answers. Nature-based solutions.
May I add another comment on how we are thinking about moving between time scales, right? To like slow down to connect with entities that have a different time scale, or like even looking into our own bodies when we are talking about all the microorganisms underneath the ground, but also maybe in within ourselves. And when we were all talking about the darkness and how can we imagine the darkness or like understand it, I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be visual, right? But that's when all the other senses that were sort of suppressed can become very important and a good use of our human bodies that we still have, and we can still connect with nature in that way, but maybe also not the intellectual aspects or not necessarily the visual aspects, but like this very, that's how it smells. Or so yes, I really appreciate this group thinking how we learn from nature and from each other, digesting all of that and helping each other navigate in this.
And I'm curious how you started learning about soil, or what prompted you to do that?
Sorry, did you ask me?
Uh-huh. No, Janet.
Thank you.
So I started learning about, well, I'm a landscape designer by training, and you know, I did learn about plants and the basics of soil back when I was in the educational system. But it was clear after years of working with plants that, you know, that's really all we were focusing on was the plants. And you know, I worked in a sort of ecological framework, so I thought of them in plant communities and tried to work with whatever the particular space was, the ecology of the space, but it was still so superficial. And then I started, you know, always did continuing education and started listening to speakers, and the food soil web, and it just got me interested in it. So I just started reading a lot. So it didn't kind of come out of nowhere. It was something I was involved with, but I had been doing this for a long time. And really, you know, back 40 years ago, we weren't taught deeply about the soil, you know, and so that's become more and more and more apparent, I think, as other people have said, over time. And so for me, the imagining, and it was more about the energy that I was sensing and feeling within myself in connection to this new and clearer understanding, as much as we know today, because obviously we don't know everything. Like, what does that energy feel like? And that's sort of how it all developed for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Petra, can you say anything about, you mentioned that you're working on layers of microbes, virtual work with layers of...
Yes, I can talk about that. It's really fun. I'm having a very good time with it. And it's also pretty early days in this one. But yeah, I'm working on a project called Planting Disabled Futures. And it's a virtual reality project. it's a crib cave, so it's a performance is very much part of it. So it's not just one of those things that you only wear on your head. You actually are engaging with other humans, and there's other artists involved who are creating haptic objects that combine seaweed and digital work. So there's some, I think there's going to be many different ways in which people are going to engage with this project when it's hopefully ready to tour next year. But the virtual reality part actually literally does some of that's why I was asking the question about the darkness in the soil. So we have 3 sites. We're deep, so it's all about a tree. There's a tree, right? So right now I have a 3D tree with portals in it. And there's 3 sites on the tree. One is in the roots, one is on the bark, and one is in the canopy. And each of these 3 layers has 3 scales. One is sort of human scale, where you can see a leaf and it looks like a leaf. Oh, this is a leaf. I recognize a leaf, right? Then there is a scale that's like a tiny tree spider or another small organism, like a small little beetle or something. So that's second scale. And then the third scale is microorganisms. This is where it's like at the microscopic level, where you can see individual stomata on a leaf, where you can begin to be unclear about whether you're inside or outside the tree, whether you can move into a tree cell. So that's for me one of the most exciting layers to work on. And, Unreal, the engine that I'm using, there are some pre-programmed creatures that you can use as animation. So for instance, I'm thinking about, you guys know what water bears are? Those weird little tiny water bear creatures that some of us see under microscopes. Yeah. So they have a very specific animated form, and people have put them into some of these engines. So what I get to think about is, well, how realistic do I want to be? I don't want to be realistic. Virtual reality is normally all about mimicking realism, which I'm like, well, I'm not interested in that. That's not me. This is going to be like a queer crip disco kind of environment. So yes, it's going to be pink tardigrades, right? It's going to be so much more fun. Pink, shiny tardigrades that walk by you and that you can disco with. So that's going to be kind of the idea of this virtual reality. And there's 2 pathways you can take through all of these different layers. And one is visual. And I'm saying this as if it's all happening already, right? So this is like, hopefully this is what it's going to look like. So there's going to be the visual pathway, but then there's also an audio pathway because it's very much within a disability environment. So I want to do a non-visually led one that really is thinking about the comfort of darkness, for instance, so really hanging out there among the roots, among the microorganisms there, and just not being clear, not bringing the light. So as we were just talking about. So what about if we don't have a good, long, hard look at something, but instead are just touching and moving and weaving through, and just, the darkness and light and shininess are sort of in a really interesting connection with one another. So I'm trying to work with my team on somehow making this all work, and we'll see. So planting disabled futures, and we can next academic year it'll be ready to tour a bit, and it's just literally a bunch of headsets and hopefully a sound bed and some of these beautiful objects. So if anybody wants to play with that, let us know. We're up for playing, and it's very fun to play with these. The emphasis will be on disco time. Yes, hopefully we'll have a few in various locations. Yeah.
And you're enthusiastically nodding your head.
Yes, I can see people who want to hang out in the dark. That's great. Love it.
I'm curious from your statements, Anne, about how so you work with the peat moss. Can you say more about that? I was just so intrigued by the way you talked about it.
Well, in that piece, I was using this camera. So I was at this science institution. They have a hyperspectral camera. So it's beyond the spectrum that we can see visually. There's all of this other information about cell health and water content, tons of things. So we were able to kind of get this z-axis of information for each pixel in the photograph. And then I mapped that onto the musical staff. So in that way, working with like some very specific samples of soil from that site. Since then, I've done some work. Rhonda, who's in this exhibition too, we've been part of a group of artists burying fabric in soil, this sort of citizen science technique to find out, how much microbial activity is happening. And then the microbes are making the first marks on these canvases. And then we've been able, through a grant, to send some of these soil samples and get sequenced like what's living there. So I sent a soil sample that's like maybe this big, very small, and there were 300 or 400 bacteria and fungi, like 300 or 400 of each in just that small amount. So speaking of, someone was asking earlier, like, how do we visualize all of that? I think there's just like this sense of like teeming life and multiplicity. So I was interested in the coral piece, like to have multiple voices and to have this aeration expressed by humans breathing, and just to have like all of these layers, I find really interesting.
Thank you for sharing, and this is so amazing. And I'm also really interested in like this in-between space of when dirt becomes soil. So if you want to talk a little more, like what were these like moments of you that you discovered, or the other microbe experts?
We were talking a lot about that, of like, is dirt, soil out of place, and who are we to decide these kind of things? And I just have one microbe that I found that I thought was so interesting. There's this vestigial part. This is a microbe in Oklahoma, where I was living before Denver. And it has an algae part that it has grown to live around. Like they now live together, even though the thought was there was, some sort of predator-prey relationship originally. So even like inside the soil, these beings are having these relationships change over time. But I would love to hear what others have to say about this too.
Since we're sharing new projects, I've started working on a project that I think is going to take me 5 years to complete. And so I'm looking forward to finishing it and having it exhibit when I'm 80. But I did a whole community outreach and had 50 people. It was totally random through email and Facebook. 50 people, the first 50 people chose their favorite native California wildflower. And so I'm creating a piece that centers around a blooming spirit over a soil spirit. And so it's looking at the cycles of life and death, but how death is what, and the soil is what creates life. And those figures will be surrounded by the 50 different California native wildflowers. So I've been having a great time working on that. All in ceramic.
We should have a giant installation with all this work. I mean, I could just see it. I listen to all of these things. We could just combine them all in one giant hall, and we could have this full soil immersion. Sounds like to
That's
me
a great idea.
In 5 years' time.
Yeah. Yeah, we could have the film room and the wall room and the pedestal room and the, rolling around room.
Well, I hope that you can all communicate with each other as this show goes on, and we'll have 2 more sessions and come to the other ones so that you can meet the other artists, and maybe something will manifest out of this into some other, maybe some regional shows that are in physical locations. That could be a possibility. So I think, Christina, how are we doing? Should we wrap up now? I think we're very...
Yeah, I just want to float the question to everyone. We do want to have some kind of a science and art panel probably in January. So if you have any ideas of people, scientists working with any of these themes that you all have brought up, that you would love to hear talking on a panel, you can certainly share those ideas with us, and then we can approach them, and because we want to put together something really exciting that would interest everybody. So yeah.
Yeah, I had a microbiologist approach me after she saw my work in a show that she used photographs of my pieces in a talk that she did about loss of biodiversity. So yeah, it's great to connect with the scientists. I can recommend her.
Okay, send us her information.
Okay, will do.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you mentioned the loss of biodiversity, because we're just starting to be aware of all the life in the soil, and after all the plowing and tilling and poisoning and fertilizing that's been going on for a very long time, we probably lost incredible numbers of species of microbial beings who would, just been extincted. And we never even knew it.
All right. Well, I think we'll thank you all for coming, and hope that you can come. Christina, why don't you show on the slide again the dates for the other ones, or you can look at the newsletter.
Yeah, it's in the newsletter.
And we'd love to see you, and thank you so much for your work and your and for coming.
And thank you for putting up with all my fumbles.
Thank you, Christina.